The basement of the Vanecrest luxury high-rise smells like damp concrete, industrial-grade degreaser, and the slow, inevitable decay of things that people on the higher floors never have to think about. I like it down here. It is honest. Pipes do not lie to you. If a valve is leaking, it tells you with a steady, rhythmic drip. If a boiler is about to blow, it screams. Down here, I am not an omega with a bank account balance that looks like a cry for help. I am the guy who keeps the world from freezing over when the winter winds whip off the river. I was leaning against the cold casing of boiler number 4, my head resting against the vibrating metal, trying to breathe through a wave of nausea that felt like a physical weight in my gut. 6 weeks. I was 6 weeks along, and my body was already staging a full-scale rebellion against the very idea of solid food. I pulled my phone out of my pocket with shaky fingers, the screen cracked in 3 places, and looked at the photo I'd taken at the free clinic an hour ago. It was a grainy, black and white smudge. A tiny, flickering pulse of life that looked more like a bean than a human being, but it was mine. It was the only thing in this entire city that belonged to me. I needed to tell someone. I needed to tell Sarah, the only person who wouldn't look at my grease-stained coveralls and wonder why I was bringing a child into this mess. My thumbs were clumsy, slick with a bit of stray lubricant from the HVAC pump I'd just serviced. I typed in the number from memory, or what I thought was memory, and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The little blue bubble popped up. Delivered. I stared at it, waiting for her to freak out, to call me, to tell me we'd find a way to make it work. But then I looked at the number. 1 digit. One stupid, tiny, insignificant digit was different. I hadn't sent the ultrasound to Sarah. I had sent a photo of my secret, my terrifying, life-altering secret, to a complete stranger. My heart didn't just drop, it performed a frantic, panicked swan dive into the pit of my stomach. I scrambled to delete it, but the red receipt appeared almost instantly. A cold, hollow feeling washed over me. I tried to tell myself it was fine. It was just a wrong number. Some random person in the city now had a photo of my uterus. They'd probably think it was a prank and move on. I blocked the number immediately, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts that smelled like the peppermint gum I was chewing to hide the morning sickness. "It's fine, Elias," I whispered to the empty basement. "It's done. You're a ghost. You're invisible. You've spent 3 years being the guy who fixes the lights and disappears into the service elevator. You can disappear from this, too." I went back to work. I spent the next 3 hours chasing a stubborn electrical fault on the 14th floor, my mind a frantic loop of what-if scenarios. What if they traced the phone? No, that's crazy. Who would bother? It's just a photo. But the alpha scent in the building felt heavier today. Or maybe I was just hyper-aware of it. The Vanecrest was full of alphas, the kind of men who wore suits that cost more than my annual salary and looked through me as if I were part of the architecture. I was used to it. I preferred it. Being noticed by an alpha usually meant trouble, and being noticed while carrying a pup that didn't have a father's name on the paperwork was a one-way ticket to a very dark place. By the time I clocked out at 8 in the evening, I was exhausted. My back ached, and the scent of the lobby, a mix of expensive lilies and the sharp ozone tang of the high-speed elevators, made my head spin. I just wanted to get to my tiny studio apartment, eat a piece of dry toast, and sleep for 100 years. I walked toward the service exit, my boots heavy on the marble floor, when the main elevator chimed. It was the gold-leafed one. The one that went straight to the penthouse. The one I'd only been inside twice in 3 years, both times to fix a recessed lighting fixture that the owner was too impatient to wait for the morning shift to handle. The doors slid open, and the world seemed to tilt. Julian Vane stepped out. He didn't walk so much as he occupied the space around him, a predatory grace that made the air feel suddenly too thin. He was the reason the building was named Vanecrest. He was the alpha of alphas, a man whose scent was usually a distant, intimidating hum of cedar and dark coffee, but up close, it was a roar. It was a thunderstorm rolling in over a high mountain forest, cold, powerful, and utterly inescapable. I ducked my head, focusing on the scuff marks on my boots, trying to merge with the shadows of the concierge desk. Usually, he walked past me without a glance. Usually, I was just the maintenance guy. But today, the footsteps stopped. The polished leather of his shoes entered my field of vision. I froze. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Elias," he said. His voice was a low, resonant vibration that I felt in my marrow. He'd never said my name before. I didn't even think he knew I had one. I looked up, slowly, my neck stiff with tension. He was holding his phone. He didn't look angry, he looked focused, in a way that was much more terrifying. He turned the screen toward me. It was my text. The ultrasound. The grainy smudge of my future. "Whose child is this?" he asked. The question wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. I tried to speak, but my throat was a desert. I swallowed hard, the scent of him, that overwhelming, dark timber and spice, filling my lungs and making my knees weak. I sent that by mistake," I managed to croak out. "Wrong number. I'm sorry. I already blocked it. It won't happen again." I tried to step around him, my heart rate spiking into the red zone, but he moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man in a three-piece suit. He blocked my path, his presence a physical wall. "I didn't ask if it was a mistake," he said, his eyes narrowing. They were the color of slate after a rainstorm. "I asked whose it is." I felt the panic rising, a hot, frantic tide. "Mine," I snapped, the sarcasm I used as a shield finally kicking in. "It's mine, Mr. Vane. Seeing as it's inside my body, that's usually how it works. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very glamorous dinner of saltine crackers waiting for me." I tried to push past him again, but he caught my arm. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. The heat of his palm through my thin coveralls felt like a brand. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Home," I said, my voice trembling now. "I'm going home." He looked at me for a long, silent moment, his nostrils flaring slightly as he caught my scent. I knew what he was smelling. The sweet, milky undertone of a pregnant omega, currently soured by the sharp, metallic tang of pure, unadulterated terror. "No," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming something primal. "You aren't going back to that basement apartment, Elias. You're coming with me." I laughed. It was a high, hysterical sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Excuse me? I think the altitude on the 32nd floor has cut off your oxygen, sir. I work here. I don't live here. And I certainly don't live with you." I tried to yank my arm back, but he didn't budge. He looked at the concierge, who was staring at us with wide, shocked eyes, and then back at me. "You've been sharing an elevator with me for 2 years, Julian said, his voice surprisingly quiet now. "I've watched you fix the heating in my unit. I've watched you replace the bulbs in the hallway when you thought no one was looking. I know you know every inch of this building. And I know that you're exhausted, you're hungry, and you're carrying a child in a place that barely has functioning hot water. That ends now." He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't ask. He simply steered me toward the private elevator. I wanted to fight him. I wanted to scream. But the weirdest thing happened. As soon as the elevator doors closed and we were encased in the scent of him, the nausea that had been my constant companion for 2 weeks just vanished. My body, traitorous and instinct-driven as it was, decided that this alpha was safety. My inner omega was practically purring, while my brain was screaming that I was being kidnapped by a billionaire. "This is illegal," I muttered as the numbers on the display climbed toward 32. "I'm pretty sure this is a felony. I have a lease. I have a cat. Well, it's a stray that I feed behind the dumpsters, but he counts." Julian didn't look at me. He was watching the floor numbers. "Your lease is being settled. Your things will be moved tomorrow. As for the cat, we'll discuss the logistics of a pet on the penthouse floor later." The doors chimed. 32. The penthouse wasn't a home, it was a museum of marble and glass. It was cold, silent, and smelled like nothing but filtered air in Julian. He led me to a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment. Stay here, he said. I'll have food sent up. He turned to leave, but I found my voice. Why? I shouted. He stopped at the door, his silhouette dark against the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Because that child is a Vanecrest resident, he said, his tone unreadable. And because I've spent 2 years not asking your name, Elias. I'm not making that mistake for a third. He left, and I did the only logical thing. I sat on the edge of the bed, which felt like sitting on a cloud made of silk, and burst into tears. I was 24 years old, I had $42 in my savings account, and I was currently the guest/prisoner of a man who probably thought a gallon of milk cost $20. The absurdity of it was almost as overwhelming as the fear. I woke up the next morning to the smell of actual, honest-to-God bacon. My stomach did a little flip, but for once, it wasn't out of disgust. I stumbled out of the bedroom, my hair a bird's nest and my coveralls wrinkled beyond repair, to find a table set for two. Julian was sitting there, reading something on a tablet, looking like he'd been carved out of granite. He looked up when I entered. Sit, he said. I sat. I didn't mean to, but my legs just gave out. I'm not staying, I said, even as I reached for a piece of toast. I have a shift. The boiler in the north wing has a temperamental pressure gauge, and if I'm not there to bleed the lines, the whole system will lock up. Julian took a sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. I've already called your supervisor. You've been put on indefinite paid leave. I nearly choked on my toast. You what? You can't do that. That job is my life. It's how I stay me. He leaned forward, and the scent of him, warm, comforting, and terrifyingly masculine, swirled around me. You are me, he said. The words were a shock to the system. What? I whispered. In this world, Elias, people like you are invisible until they are needed. I let that happen for too long. But you are carrying a life, and you are doing it in my building. That makes you my responsibility. Whether you like it or not. I spent the next 3 days trying to find a way out. I checked the windows, sealed, the doors, coated, and the service stairs, guarded by a very polite man named Marcus who looked like he could crush a bowling ball with his bare hands. I was a golden-caged bird. But the cage was comfortable. The morning sickness began to fade, replaced by a constant, ravenous hunger. Julian, for all his coldness, noticed everything. He didn't say anything when he found me in his walk-in closet on the fourth night, curled up in a pile of his discarded cashmere sweaters, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. I was nesting. It was humiliating. I was a grown man, a professional technician who could rewire a breaker box in the dark, and here I was, huffing in Alpha's laundry because it made the little bean in my belly feel safe. Does it help? He asked. I jumped, nearly knocking over a row of handmade Italian shoes. He was standing in the doorway, his tie loosened, looking tired in a way I hadn't seen before. I clutched a navy blue sweater to my chest, my face burning. The room was cold, I lied. It was 72 degrees in the penthouse, controlled by a climate system I had personally calibrated a year ago. Julian didn't call me out. He walked over, sat on the floor next to me, and did something that made my heart stop. He reached out and touched my stomach. It was just a light pressure, his hand warmed through the fabric of my shirt, but it felt like an electric shock. The little bean, the baby, seemed to settle instantly, a sense of profound calm washing over me. I've spent my whole life being a resource, Julian said, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the hum of the building. Everyone wants a piece of the firm, a piece of the name, a piece of the floor space. You're the only person who has ever looked at me and wanted to be somewhere else. He looked at me then, and the slate gray eyes were full of something that wasn't power. It was loneliness. It's disorienting, Elias. To finally find someone who doesn't want anything from me, only to realize I want everything from them. I didn't know what to say. I was an omega who fixed pipes. He was an alpha who owned the sky. The distance between us was 32 floors of solid steel and social standing. I just want to be sure I'm not an experiment, I said, my voice cracking. I'm not a project you're working on because you're bored. He pulled his hand away, but the warmth remained. You aren't an experiment. You're the first thing in this building that feels real. Things changed after that. The silence in the penthouse stopped being oppressive and started being peaceful. We fell into a rhythm. He would leave for the firm at 7 in the morning, and I would spend the day wandering the vast rooms, feeling like an interloper but a well-fed one. I started taking over the maintenance of the penthouse myself. I couldn't help it. The faucet in the guest bath had a slight whistle, and the wine cellar's humidity was off by 3%. It gave me something to do with my hands. Julian would come home at 9, and we would eat dinner in a comfortable silence that was slowly being filled with small talk. He asked about the boiler room. He asked about the relay systems. He listened with a genuine intensity that made me feel like I was explaining the secrets of the universe, rather than the mechanics of a steam trap. But the world outside the 32nd floor didn't stop turning. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the maintenance guy had moved into the penthouse. The threat arrived in the form of a woman named Beatrice Vane, Julian's aunt, and a woman who looked like she had been sharpened on a whetstone. She arrived unannounced on a Tuesday, while Julian was at a board meeting. I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to use a $50,000 espresso machine, when she walked in. She looked at my old, oversized t-shirt and my bare feet, and her scent, a sharp, acidic smell of old perfume and bitterness, hit me like a slap. So, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You're the little distraction Julian has been hiding. I must say, I expected something more. Or at least something cleaner. I felt the old Elias, the one who fought for space in the basement, flare to life. I'm the guy who keeps your lights on, lady. If I were you, I'd be a little nicer to the person who knows where the main shutoff valve is. Her eyes flashed with rage. You are a liability. A common worker, an omega with no lineage, carrying a child that will never be recognized by this family. You think Julian cares about you? You're a curiosity. A charity case. Once the child is born, you'll be back in the gutter where you belong, and we will ensure the Vane name is protected from your influence. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the fear I'd been carrying all along, voiced by someone who had the power to make it true. I wasn't a mate. I was a mistake. A wrong number that had gone too far. I didn't see Julian standing in the doorway. I didn't smell him until the room suddenly went cold, the scent of the coming storm slamming into the space with the force of a physical blow. Beatrice, Julian said. The name was a warning. She turned, her face twisting into a mask of false concern. Julian, darling, I was just explaining to this young man the reality of his situation. We can't have the press finding out about. Julian moved so fast it was a blur. He didn't touch her, but he stepped between us, his back to me, his entire frame radiating a level of alpha aggression that made the air vibrate. There is no distraction here, Beatrice. There is only my mate and my child. And if you ever speak to him again, if you ever even think about entering this floor without an invitation, I will strip your holdings from the firm before the sun sets. Do I make myself clear? Beatrice gasped, her face turning a mottled red. Your mate? Julian, be reasonable. He is the man who knows this building better than I do, Julian interrupted, his voice like grinding stone. He is the man who has worked for every cent he has, while you have lived off the interest of my father's labor. He is more of a Vane than you will ever be. Now. Get. Out. She fled. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the scent of Julian's protective rage. I was shaking, my hands pressed against the marble countertop. He turned around, his eyes still dark, his chest heaving. He looked at me, and for the first time, the mask was completely gone. He looked terrified. Elias, he said. I should have said it sooner. I shouldn't have let her in here. I looked at him, the man on the 32nd floor, and I realized he wasn't protecting a resource. He wasn't managing a liability. He was a man who had just burned every bridge he had for a guy who fixed his pipes. You called me your mate, I whispered. He stepped closer, his sense softening, turning into that warm, deep cedar that always made me feel like I could finally breathe. I didn't say it because I had to, he said, reaching out to cup my face. His thumb traced the line of my jaw. I said it because it's the only thing I've ever been sure of. Since the moment you explained that relay system in the elevator, I've been trying to figure out how to keep you. I just didn't know how to ask. The months that followed were a blur of changes. I didn't move back to the basement, but I didn't stop working either. We reached a compromise. I became the building's chief engineering consultant, a title Julian insisted on, which basically meant I got to keep my coveralls but had a much better health insurance plan and didn't have to report to a supervisor who smelled like old ham. The pregnancy progressed with the kind of ease that comes when you aren't worried about where your next meal is coming from. Julian was a lot. He read every book on omega care. He hired a private chef who specialized in prenatal nutrition, whom I promptly fired because I wanted grilled cheese sandwiches at 3 a.m, and the chef kept trying to give me kale. Julian eventually learned how to make the grilled cheese himself. Seeing a man who managed a multi-billion-dollar investment firm standing in a silk bathrobe at 3:15 in the morning, meticulously buttering sourdough bread, was the moment I knew I was in deep. The birth happened on a Tuesday in July. It was hot, the city shimmering in a haze of heat and humidity, but the penthouse was cool and quiet. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-style labor. It was long, exhausting, and filled with the scent of Julian's unwavering presence. He didn't leave my side. Not once. When the baby finally arrived, a boy with Julian's slate-gray eyes and a cry that could be heard on the 25th floor, the world finally felt like it had clicked into place. We named him Leo. Not because it was a family name, but because he was a tiny, fierce thing who had survived my panic and Julian's silence and the coldness of the world to be here. 1 year later, I was standing in the lobby of the Vane Crest, waiting for the elevator. I had Leo strapped to my chest in a carrier, his small head resting against my heart. I was wearing my work shirt, the one with Elias embroidered over the pocket, because I still liked to check the boiler pressures on Tuesdays. It was a habit I couldn't break. The gold-leafed elevator chimed, and Julian stepped out. He looked the same, bespoke suit, predatory grace, the scent of cedar and success. But when he saw us, his whole face softened. He didn't care that we were in the middle of a crowded lobby. He walked over and kissed me, a slow, lingering kiss that smelled like home. "How's the north wing?" he asked, his hand resting on Leo's back. "The pressure is holding," I said, smiling. "But the hallway light on the 32nd floor is flickering again. I think the ballast is going." Julian laughed, a low, warm sound. "I know. I noticed it this morning." I looked at him, really looked at him. "You noticed a flickering light?" He nodded, pulling me closer. "I've been paying attention, Elias. Just like you taught me." An older woman, a resident from the 20th floor who had always been a bit of a snob, walked past us and stopped. She looked at me, then at Julian, then back at me. "Excuse me," she said to me, her voice curious. "Do you know the man from the penthouse?" I looked at Julian, who was watching me with an expression that made the 32 floors between us feel like nothing at all. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and proud. "He seems to know you," the woman remarked, her eyes narrowing. "He's been paying attention," I replied, the ghost of a smile playing on my lips. She huffed and walked away, clearly confused by the hierarchy. Julian leaned down, his breath warm against my ear. "The light still works, by the way," he whispered. "I checked it myself this morning." I leaned into him, the scent of vanilla and honey from my own skin mingling with his cedar and coffee. "I know," I said. "I'm the one who fixed it." We walked toward the elevator together, the Alpha from the 32nd floor and the Omega from the basement. It was a small, stupid accident that had brought us here. A wrong number. A misdirected text. A moment of exhaustion that had led to a collision of two worlds that were never supposed to meet. But as the doors closed and we began our ascent, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just fixing things for other people. I was building something for myself. The elevator climbed, the numbers ticking upward, leaving the basement and the grease and the invisibility behind. We were going home. And as I looked at the reflection of my family in the polished brass of the elevator car, I knew that the wrong number had been the only right one I'd ever dialed. The city stretched out below us, a carpet of lights and noise, but up here, in the quiet space between the floors, there was only us. I thought about that first text message often. The way I had panicked. The way I had tried to block him out. I thought about the version of me that was still down there, hiding in the shadows, afraid to be seen. That Elias was gone. In his place was someone who knew his own value, someone who wasn't afraid to take up space. Julian's hand found mine, his fingers interlacing with mine, his thumb rubbing soothing circles over my knuckles. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. It was the language of us, a language that didn't need suits or marble or investment portfolios. It was the language of paying attention. We reached the 32nd floor, and the doors slid open to the familiar, filtered air of the penthouse. But it didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like a home. There were toys on the marble floor. There was a stray cat named Barnaby who had successfully negotiated his way into a permanent residency on the velvet sofa. There was a life here. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows over the city. "You thinking about the basement?" Julian asked, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. "No," I said, leaning back into his strength. "I was thinking about the light in the hallway." He chuckled, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Of course you were." "It's important, Julian," I said, turning in his arms to face him. "The small things. The things people don't notice. That's what keeps the whole building standing." He looked at me with an intensity that still made my breath hitch. "I know," he said. "And I'm never going to stop noticing them. Or you." The baby made a small, happy sound in his sleep, and we stood there for a long time, watching the world turn below us. We were 32 floors up, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the height. I wasn't afraid of falling. Because I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than any mechanical blueprint, that I had finally found the place where I belonged. The wrong number had led me to the right person, and the accidental connection had become the most intentional thing in my life. The building hummed around us, a steady, rhythmic vibration of power and heat, and I closed my eyes, listening to the heart of the world I helped maintain, and the heart of the man who helped maintain me. It was perfect. It was messy, and chaotic, and entirely unplanned, but it was ours. And as the last light of the sun faded from the sky, I knew that no matter how many floors were between us and the ground, we were exactly where we were supposed to be. I looked at my phone, the screen still cracked, the same one I'd used to send that fateful text. I thought about deleting the message, finally, after all this time. But then I changed my mind. I locked the screen and set it on the table. It was a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. The ones that start with a mistake and end with a miracle. Julian kissed my forehead, his scent settling over me like a warm blanket. "I love you, Elias," he whispered. It was the first time he'd said it so clearly, without the armor of his position or the weight of his name. I looked up at him, my heart full to bursting. "I love you too, Julian. Even if you still don't know how to use the espresso machine." He laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. We were a maintenance omega and a billionaire alpha, a wrong number and a right turn, a story that shouldn't have worked but did. And as we walked toward our bedroom, leaving the city lights behind us, I knew that this was only the beginning. The pipes would still leak, the lights would still flicker, and the world would still be a complicated, difficult place. But we would face it together, one floor at a time. And that was more than enough for me. I sat down on the bed, watching Julian settle Leo into his crib. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight I'd installed myself, one that didn't hum or flicker. I thought about the journey from the basement to the penthouse, the literal and metaphorical climb. It wasn't just about the money or the luxury. It was about being seen. Truly seen. For 3 years, I had been a ghost in these halls, a shadow that fixed the broken things and disappeared before the residents woke up. I had accepted that as my lot in life. I had thought that being in Omega meant being a supporting character in someone else's grand narrative. But Julian had changed that. He hadn't just given me a place to live, he had given me a place to exist. He had looked at the grainy photo of a smudge and seen a future. He had looked at a grease-stained technician and seen a mate. I reached out and touched the navy blue sweater he had left on the chair, the same one I had nested with months ago. It still smelled like him. It always would. Julian came over and sat beside me, taking my hand in his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how lucky I am," I said. "That I'm bad at typing phone numbers." He smiled, pulling me into his side. "I'm the lucky one, Elias. I was living in a building I didn't understand, surrounded by people I didn't trust. You gave this place a soul." I leaned my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes. The building hummed, a low, comforting vibration that felt like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. His heartbeat. Our heartbeat. The 32nd floor was high, but we were grounded. We were solid. We were home. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that no matter what happened tomorrow, the light in the hallway would be bright, the heat would be steady, and the man beside me would be there to catch me if I ever started to fall. The accident was over. The life had begun. And it was more beautiful than anything I could have ever planned. I realized then that the most important repairs aren't the ones you do with a wrench or a screwdriver. They're the ones you do with your heart. They're the moments when you choose to stay, when you choose to see, and when you choose to love. We were the evidence of that truth. Two people from different floors, brought together by a glitch in the system, building something that would last forever. And as the moon rose over the Vane crest, casting a silver light over the city, I knew that we were exactly where we were meant to be. The maintenance Omega and his Alpha, forever connected by a single, perfect mistake.